Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel, we have Dave Kimura.
Hey, everyone.
John Epperson.
Hello.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. And this week, we decided to talk about our development environments.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code DEVCHAT at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code DEVCHAT at Sentry.io.
So I'm curious, just to start out with, do we all run on Macs? Or is that even an assumption that we can make anymore?
I don't think it's a fair assumption anymore because you have a lot of people going to Linux or using the Windows or the Linux subsystem on Windows.
Yeah.
But here, I think we're using Macs.
I primarily use a Mac. I have everything that I need to work on set up on my Windows desktop. I rarely use it, but it is there. And I have seriously considered in the next year or two picking up a Linux machine instead of a Mac. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I run on a MacBook Pro pretty much for everything. In fact, I actually hook it up as my main machine at home when I'm at home, just because then I just take the same machine with the same environments with me. But yeah, how do I put it? I'm becoming less and less excited about what's offered on the Mac, if that makes sense.
I have a first generation touchpad MacBook Pro.
How old is that?
It's a couple years old, but unlike my last MacBook Pro, I don't feel the same like durability, which is the thing that I really loved.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if I'm going to have this one for 8 years kind of thing.
The issue that I have with the one that I have, it's the 2017. I think it's 2017, October 2017.
Yeah, I'm looking mine up right now.
I could look. Yeah, I probably ought to, and then I can just say it. But it was the one where they switched everything over to be the Thunderbolt ports, the USB-C ports. And
okay.
That on its own drives me absolutely up the wall. I have dongles for everything. Yeah.
That wasn't
MacBook
hard
Pro,
for me.
15-inch, 2017.
I was already USB-C before, or I had like a Nexus 6P, I think, at the time, right? Which was USB-C. And so I already had a lot of USB-C stuff. And then all that I had to swap out were cords like USB-C to HDMI and things like that, right?
Yeah, and I think I'd be better off if I had some kind of like USB-C to my monitor and USB-C to my keyboard and things like that. But yeah, it just drives me crazy because ultimately what I've wound up doing is getting a couple of docking stations that connect through USB-C, and then I have all the ports that everything runs on anyway. The other issue, though, is that when I actually travel, when I go anywhere, yeah, everything that I have that I want to hook up to my computer has to hook up to a dongle. Because before that, it connected to other stuff.
My big problem with USB-C, I think it's awesome, but then you have like 5 different specifications of USB-C.
Yeah.
You know, you have the old USB 2.0, USB 3.1 Gen 1, and then you have the Gen 2, and then you have the Thunderbolt 20 gigabits per second, and then Thunderbolt 40 gigabits per second, all with the same cable. They all look alike. You have no idea which one is which, unless if they actually marked it because they were nice. And so you might be using a external NVMe drive thinking that you're going to get your full 10 gigabits or 20 gigabits per second, but then you're transferring it 40 megabytes per second. So that's one of my annoyances with it because it's not clear that this configuration is not going to work. And now with Macs, you're just kind of like thrown into that world with little to no alternative. The MacBook Pros have 4 USB-C connections, which are all Thunderbolt 3, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, it's just a mess. I really don't think that they thought through those specifications well. But I do like that we all have a single connection at the same time.
Yeah, trade-off city, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually going to say that I think you bring up a good point, right? Because you can't tell the difference between cables by sight. You also end up in a world where you're going to buy cables off the internet, right, for whatever thing. And, it's really hard to figure out if this is a good, bad cable, if it's going to do what you think it is, if it's going to charge your stuff as fast as it says it is, things like that, right?
That's the deal and I think Dave kind of made this point, was that everything that I've plugged into my MacBook Pro works, right? I hook up anything to it that has that connector. It'll work, but the point is that, you have something that's set up to run across one of those. I don't know if I want to call it a protocol or that version of USB. And because you're on a different one, there you go. Because you have something that is expecting one specification, it'll fall back to the common specification, but then you don't get all the good features out of it. The other issue I have with Macs these days is that, honestly, I can get a much nicer machine for much less money by going with a Linux machine. I just can. And the other thing is then I can turn it around and I can dual boot it to Windows, and I can play my video games on Windows, and they perform better, they act better, they a lot of them are written for Windows and I can't even run them on my Mac. And so I kind of get the best of both worlds by going with a PC. The only reason that I got this MacBook Pro when I did was because the one I had before died, and I needed something that I could just set up and run with in a day, and I had backups for my Mac. And so I could just, hook it up to Time Machine and go, okay, I need my machine back, and it just did it.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point that you make with something like Time Machine. There is a nice spit and polish with Apple that they have conveniences that will help protect your data. Time Machine for me has been a lifesaver over the past few weeks. I've had to restore back because my iMac Pro kind of crapped out on me. So there was little to no data loss there. And I think that it's also important to be able to say, okay, what system am I going to be able to get up and running as quickly as possible on? And that's really less about the hardware, but more about how we actually set up our environment.
Right.
I mean, it depends, right? So I'm
going to use a Hackintosh.
Well, I do a lot of Docker stuff, right? So hardware matters when you're doing Docker stuff.
Yeah, but the interesting thing with Docker, speaking of that, is that Docker runs on Windows and Mac.
And Linux, right?
And Linux. So you are fairly portable that way, right?
Yep. So, and that's kind of what I was going to bring up. So my sort of trade-off is by living in the Docker ecosystem, right? I get my portability from that rather than from, Mac's ecosystem. But then I'm more geared towards looking for good hardware that's going to last me a long time, which is part of the reason why I am considering buying a Linux machine over the next few years. Kind of I feel like Apple's, I don't know, I feel like this last refresh was at least an attempt to kind of convince me that, yes, their MacBook Pros are going to be solid machines, but I'm not ready to buy yet. So we shall see.
With the Mac updates or the Apple updates, it seems to me that it's kind of hit or miss. So like the 2 refreshes before this, especially with the Mac Pros, they've really screwed the pooch on that, sorry. But on the MacBook Pros, they tend to do a little bit better. And it seems like they don't quite give you what you want. Then the next version, they get a little closer. And then the next version, they kind of nail it. And then the next version after that, they screw it up again. And so it just kind of follows that cycle.
Sure. But,
so if you're buying the right version of Apple, then you're great. And if not, then it's not going to be quite what you wanted.
Yeah, it's about the confidence that I can buy a machine. When you're trying to make that judgment call, like right then, it's tough to gauge, is this machine going to last me a long time?
Well, and the one thing that really has disappointed me with the Apple lineup is their extendability, not being able to upgrade the RAM on a computer. At the time, I might buy a 13-inch MacBook Pro, which will do everything I needed to CPU-wise and graphic-wise. But if I start getting more in-depth in a video editing or with doing anything that requires a lot of memory, so Docker per se, because you have to allocate X amount of RAM to your Docker instance running, then you can get yourself in a pretty tight corner really quickly. Your only option is to overspec when you buy it, getting something well beyond your means. So that's kind of my issue with it right now. But the iMac 5K does have user upgradable RAM, which is nice. But then with the Mac Pro or the iMac Pro, their Pro iMac lineup, you can't upgrade the RAM yourself, or at least you shouldn't, because there's no easily accessible RAM door.
I do miss that. I miss being able to just shove some RAM in.
Well, and a lot of times it's not even that they don't have that RAM door anymore. Like in the MacBook Pros, they solder the RAM in. You have to actually, you have to warm it up, right?
Yeah, and I don't think anyone in their right mind who is buying the Mac is going to do that. You might have some really savvy electrical engineering guys who will attempt it, but I, for one's not going to attempt it on my primary machine.
Yeah, you have to have the right tools to do it. Usually it's actually, they have a solder gun that's air heated instead of, putting hot metal against your RAM. And so, you have to have the right equipment. You're going to want to have a grounding cable for your hand. I mean, it's way more than, the normal person's going to have. And I'm kind of an enthusiast and I'm not particularly comfortable doing it. So,
yep. I built my machines for years. That's kind of a thing. That particular thing is where I kind of draw the line.
So I did take apart the iMac Pro to upgrade the RAM on it one time. And it wasn't too bad of a process. You just have to watch a couple of videos and kind of know what you're doing. If you've ever built a computer, it's the same kind of concept. But what really caught me by surprise, and why I think that they say don't upgrade it yourself, is because the actual power supply, so the large capacitors, the power inverters, the AC to DC conversion, was all exposed. And the motherboard or the main board is screwed into the chassis, and you have 4 screws which actually bridge the connection from the motherboard to the actual power supply on there. So if you don't know what you're doing, if you accidentally ground out 2 of the screws, you could literally shock yourself to death. It's insane. So just some decisions like that for the sake of sleek and slim, I think are really poor trade-offs. I would rather have a computer that's half an inch thicker if you give me the ability to put in my own hardware when I need it.
Yeah, I agree. I really like the upgradability and extensibility. Honestly, it was like 2014 or 2015 when they upgraded the Mac Pro, because I have a Mac Pro sitting under my desk, but it's one of those big giant cheese grater ones. It's like a 2013. And that was nice because, it was modular. You could replace different hardware components in there. When they put it into the smaller form factor and took that option away, it stunk. It was like, okay, well, I can't upgrade this anymore. And so, I'm on board with all that stuff, just being able to do it. And a lot of even the laptops, the Samsung laptops and stuff, there are certain ways that you can upgrade certain components. And in the MacBook Pro, it's increasingly not the case. I think you can still upgrade like the hard drive or, things like that. But more and more of that stuff's getting harder to upgrade. And it's happening on PCs too, to be fair, but it seems to be happening to a lesser degree.
Do we want to talk about the stuff that's on the laptops?
No, I like complaining. Yeah, let's talk about what we're running on the laptops. That's fine.
I'll preface this with kind of what I think about my development environment. So I do use Mac OS for my primary OS when developing. And for my environment, I want to keep it stupid simple. If it takes me an entire week to get all my settings up and running the way I want, to get everything restored to the way I want it, then to me, that's not very usable. It's overly complicated. So in a lot of scenarios and times, I'll actually go with whatever default settings that are on the system. So there's a few things I'll tweak, like the scroll mouse. I don't like natural. I like the inverted feel to it. But as far as VS Code, I limit the number of extensions I run. I do have one extension that'll allow a download from a GitHub gist, which will then install all of my extensions and settings. So something like that is pretty awesome. And I always keep a updated backup of my brew file. So with Homebrew, you can actually create a brew file, which will have a list of all the installed plugins, libraries that you have, as well as all the casks. So to get back up and running, I really only have to do a few things. And these aren't even scripted things, they're just pretty simple to do. And I think the more we complicate our development environment, just the more difficult it is going to be to repeat on a new system.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
I'm
fair.
100% in that boat. I like to be portable. I do it differently because I primarily do my stuff through Docker. I think I have like 8 things installed in Brew, not very many at all, like the bare minimum things. And I think I added like 3 this past week because of a specific project that I brought in from the outside. But typically, I don't have very many things in Brew. Almost everything is Dockerized for me. And that lets me set up pretty easily. I've used Sublime Text for a long time, mainly because at the time when I started, I was using IDEs on Windows. So I used to do Ruby Rails development on Windows back in the day. And there was, I can't remember what the original Rails thing plugin was. It was like an Eclipse thing, whatever. But I'd used Eclipse for a long time. Then we tried NetBeans, and I was like really tired of IDEs. So I used Notepad++ for like a year, and somebody was like, try the
Nice.
Sublime thing. So I did. I tried Sublime, and I've been using it ever since. But it's more or less the same thing to me as VS Code. I just use it as a kind of a text editor plus, right?
Yeah. It's funny
Yeah.
because when I started, I was using, I think it was NetBeans. And it was just because that's what we were using at the company I was working at. And then when I moved on, I started using, I tried to teach myself Vim. I used Vim for a while. And then I got a contract where Emacs was mandated. And I really got into Emacs and really, really loved it. But what I find is that maintaining all the .emacs files and stuff like that, I mean, you can go, and they have a package manager for it that you run through the text editor, and you can get a lot of functionality out of Emacs. But the setup and maintenance of it just turned out to be a pain. And so I've since then moved on to Visual Studio Code, and I've got the Emacs key bindings in there. I've got a handful of other, things in there depending on what I'm working on at the time. So I'll install plugins for React Native or Vue.js or Rails or whatever I'm working on and make that work. But yeah, that's kind of been the nice balance for me, is using something like VS Code and then just, grabbing the plugins that do what I want.
To kind of John's way of setting things up, I'm not a huge Docker fan, but I do see more and more of its value as a development environment, because you can just create mounts to your local hard drive for your project folders and then just, go off running with Docker. You don't have to worry about dependencies or anything like that. Just get Docker set up and, start developing. My current way, I still have a few legacy apps that I haven't Dockerized. So I still have RVM with Ruby installed on my primary host, but I'm really considering switching things over to Docker, because not only is that going to make life a little bit easier, but if I push up my completed images to a registry, then deployment's not only going to be super fast, it's going to be consistent. It's going to also be easy to do.
That's a really interesting thing. So I have something like 30, 40 legacy apps. I don't know. It fills up the left side of my Sublime screen, right? With just like legacy apps from various things. I'm only like actively working on like 10 of them at a time, right? But every single one of them is now Dockerized because it helps me. I don't know if you have this problem, Dave, but let's say you haven't been working on legacy app A for like 6 months, right? And you like come back to it. I find that there's always some weird thing, or I have to like brew, if it's a MySQL thing, I have to like brew, turn off one version of MySQL, turn on a different one, and then keep that whole setup like alive. And I've just always hated that. And so I started Dockerizing them, and I was like, this is amazing. I don't touch anything for 6 months. I come back, I turn off my other Docker containers, maybe because, for example, some of these are some of the first Docker things that I've ever done. So they're not as customizable, things like that. So I turn off my other Docker containers, turn those on, and boom, I'm working already. And for me, that's been amazing.
Yeah, I need to look at that some more because I've got a couple of old apps. I didn't run into it with the Postgres or MySQL version issue because I've been using the Postgres app, and you can just run, 2, 3, 4 different versions of Postgres at the same time. The issue that I ran into was the Ruby version. And then I would have like Bundler 2 installed, and that app had been using Bundler 1, so it automatically upgrades the bundle. And then when I go to deploy, the deployment, the Bundler executable is global, and so it doesn't ship with everything else. And so when I go and tell it to, do tasks with bundle exec or anything on the server, then it would crap out, or it would say, you made these upgrades and it's no longer compatible with Ruby version 2 point whatever, that's not the 2.5 or 2.6 or 2.7. And so, yeah, that turned into a headache. I need to look at Docker again as an option. But yeah, I found that Docker is easier to deal with than I thought it was, but it's still not trivial to set up on a project.
I think your first couple of Docker compose YAMLs you're just in over your head and you're drowning a little bit still.
Yeah, especially if you've got like microservices and stuff. If it's just one monolithic app, it's a little easier because you just put all the dependencies on the machine and fire it off. But
yep.
Yeah.
It is a large learning curve. I was also going to throw this out there. I specifically was calling out MySQL because I feel like Postgres is way more polished at this point.
Yes. Well, people forked MySQL. I think that might have as much to do with Oracle as it does with the maintenance curve for MySQL. But a lot of people who have been using MySQL for a long time have gone over to MariaDB because it solves some of those issues that are just no fun in MySQL, and there's no reason that you should have to deal with them anymore.
Somebody's going to beat me up over this, but I actually basically somebody's like, we're using MariaDB, and I'm like, sweet, you're using MySQL. Okay.
Basically, no, it's
together. Even though
totally fair.
They're diverged enough at this point, I should be giving them more credit.
Yeah, but I mean, they have API parity. It's just MariaDB is more reliable, I found, and more performant.
What screwed me up initially when I was starting out, I had the option of really investing in MySQL or Postgres. And so I thought, okay, all the cool kids are using Postgres. I'll check it out and see how I like it. And the one thing that really just put a bad taste in my mouth was not being able to do a case-insensitive search easily. So if I want to find a user by their email address, and if they had mixed cases, it wouldn't find the email. So there's definitely ways around that, and a lot of ways now. But initially, back in 2010 or 2012, that really wasn't so much the case. The documentation stuff just wasn't really out there or is easily findable. The one library or extension that really kind of hung me up on older projects, to answer your question, John, was libv8. The stupid JavaScript thing always, if I leave a project alone for 2 or more months, libv8 is going to come back and bite me.
Yep, so, and then you have to fix it with brew magic.
Either that or do a bundle update on your mini racer or whichever engine, Jim, you're using, and just pray hope that it's going to work.
Yeah, and then you're busy putting in git config things, and now you're just crying.
Yeah, generally though, when I'm setting up Rails projects anymore, I just have to make sure I have Node 8 or higher installed, and that solves that issue for me. So I'm not dealing with the libv8 stuff anymore.
I just updated Node to 12, thinking that was going to help me on one thing, and that was stupid. I discovered I had to downgrade it to 10 in order to get things. Oh my gosh. This is why I hate Brew, and this is why I love Docker. I just plug in the dependency that I want into that Docker container, and every time I come back to the thing, whatever it was, it's working.
Do you run your tests and everything in Docker then?
I do. It's a little slower. It's a trade-off, right? You are losing a little bit of immediate speed. And for me, being able to switch between all these projects, right? that's the speed that matters the most for me. So,
But are you really losing that much speed? Because Docker originally was based on LXC Linux containers, and there's a 3% overhead from bare metal performance versus LXC performance. So I would imagine that Docker would be a similar overhead. And I think 3% really isn't user noticeable.
So also do remember that because we're on Macs, we are actually virtualizing.
Yeah, you're running it on a VM.
So there's a little more overhead there. And same with Windows, because it's also virtualizing. But yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. Like, it's not like a 15 to 20% decrease, right? It's like somewhere between like 5 and 10.
Yeah.
It's not crazy. It is real. I think people that have Docker containers that do a lot of disk access, that can be an issue. Or if you have tons and tons and tons of files in a folder, now you have file handler problems potentially, things like that. At the edges, there are some performance issues. For the most part, most of my projects don't run into it at all. And there are tools to deal with a few of my projects that do.
Yeah, one thing that I ran into is, and this goes back to, complaints about Macs, is that I think I have a 128 gig hard drive. And when it pulls down Docker images or sets them up and stuff, it takes up disk space. And that's been an issue for me with some of the stuff that I've done playing with Docker. That said, though, most of my processes, like with testing and things like that, if I'm running tests, I usually have them running in the background and I have something set up to yell at me if something's wrong. So if the test takes an extra couple seconds to run, that's not a big deal for me, as long as I can get those notifications out of Docker. And then as far as, running the server on a Docker container versus running the server just on the command line, I don't really have a major issue with that either, because I just tell it to run. It's going to have to do whatever setup it does anyway. And then as long as it's responsive, I'm fine, right? As long as I send it a request and I get a request or a response back, I'm okay. And it doesn't take too long. So...
Yeah, my Docker effort days, I use some scripts, just some bash scripts, which would make life a little bit easier. So I called it pod. So I would just run pod at the command line. It gave me a menu option that can see all of the running containers, and then it would allow me to then SSH into those. So it was just really quick and easy to navigate through them. And then it also had some commands to clean up container images that were currently unused, not running. So it made working with Docker a little bit nicer.
Andrew Mason actually introduced me to Lazy Docker, which is just a nice kind of tool for viewing a lot of that stuff. And that just like kind of helps you to visually be like, oh, I have a ridiculous amount of, images or something like hanging out. But to be honest, just like you have to have Git hygiene, just like you have to have, hygiene for anything you do in development, you kind of have to come up with some sort of, sane Docker hygiene for yourself too. Clean your stuff out regularly. You can't just leave all your Legos lying on the floor. Someone's going to step on them, right? Same thing.
I don't want to worry about it. I'm just being honest.
I mean, okay, I guess what I mean is like, you can't just create Git branches willy-nilly and then be pissed off later when your Git repo is a gigantic mess, right? You have to have some sort of organization for yourself. And that's kind of what I mean here is you have to be sort of organized with, I think, any tool for the most part.
You should just know what I want.
All right. Well, when we get those Star Trek computers and you can just be like, computer, create this magical world for me and do all the work involved in it. And like, boom, it happens.
Oh, if only.
Alexa, make me a sandwich.
Yeah, so I'm going to be looking at Docker a little bit more to switch over some older applications, because I really think that being able to quickly get up and running on a project is the most important thing. Playing around with my development environment's fun, but it's not productive.
Right. Yeah, that's the main issue that I think we're kind of aiming at here and talking our way around is that, yeah, it's okay, well, how much time am I spending maintaining my environment versus just, getting the work done? And yeah, there's, like John said, there's some cost to running Docker in the moment, but does it add up to the hour that you're going to spend fiddling with your setup in the first place? Or, am I going to spend 2 hours less setting up Docker, and then, in the long run, I may lose minutes, but I save 2 hours up front. And so overall, I'm more able to get more work done.
I think the other thing that like comes into play is I don't think you're losing minutes, right? I don't think you're losing that let's call it 5%, right, of Docker overhead, right? I don't think you're losing that 5% all the time, because you're not really, okay, I make a request to my, in my development environment, a request to my Ruby server, right? And it comes back 5% slower. I'm not constantly making requests, right? That's
I
an
agree.
Occasional thing. Or running my tests 5% slower. That's a thing running in the background kind of asynchronously from me thinking about my problem, right? Those things aren't really costing you like 5% total of your time either. But if you are somebody calls you up one day and they're like, hey, I need you to change some feature on some old legacy project, and then it takes you a half day to like get your environment set up because of some weird problem, because sometime in between the last time that you messed with it, Mac upgraded and now everything's broken and you have to do a bunch of brew magic and git config stuff in order to figure out how to get it going. You lost half a day of productivity immediately on that thing.
Yeah, that I agree with. So besides Docker, I've been using a lot of RVM to manage my Ruby versions, but that's a hassle too. I think Docker is less hassle. I mean, what else are we using here in our setups?
I do use RBM.
RBM.
So I'll be the odd one out. I mean, I don't think anybody. I know that I have run into people who are using whatever the C one is, C Ruby or something. The old.
Yeah, or ASDF. I mean.
Yeah, ASDF does different versions of a bunch of different languages.
Yeah, I think RBM and RVM are the two most popular, though.
Yeah.
As far as Ruby version manager goes, I don't think it really matters what you use. I personally use RVM, and all of the issues that everyone has ever complained about it, I've never experienced. Usually it was some other stupid decision I've made which caused it to, crash my system, but it wasn't RVM.
Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by Cloud66. I have a Rails application and I was looking for a flexible product that takes care of deployment and gives full control of my application so I can focus on developing my code. I came across Cloud66 for Rails, which deploys your Rails application onto any cloud or server. At first I thought it's like Capistrano, but then I realized it's way more than just deployment and gets you to scale servers, replicate and back up databases, protect your servers with firewalls, and much more. It acts as your in-house DevOps team to build, deploy, and maintain your Rails applications. It's really developer-friendly, and no wonder that companies like Baremetrics, Glossy's, Career Builder, Discovery Channel, and many development agencies and I are using Cloud66. You can try Cloud66 Rails for free and get $100 free credits with the code RubyRogues-19. That's RubyRogues-19 at cloud66.com.
Well, the complaints that I ever heard about RVM were basically people didn't like the way that it managed certain aspects of Bash or whatever command line you're using, the way it interacted. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, but it gets the job done. So I'm not going to, I'm not a purist. I just want the results. So
I'll be totally honest. A lot of my motivation for using RVM is DevOps related, because I've done a lot of that work over the years. And I'm not saying that you can't get RVM to work. That's certainly not the case. Because you can, but I found that I liked kind of the architecture when everything was put together, right? When I was using RVM over when I was using RVM. I felt like I was doing more hoops to get RVM to work, and it's not going to kill you. It works. I know that people can get it done. I've seen plenty of setups where it works, right? And I've even made some, but I just happen to like it better, and so I stuck with it.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, whatever reasons, ultimately for me, I just want people to be happy and be able to get their work done. So
I made the decision like 6 years ago. I kind of don't even remember why it was painful anymore.
So testing libraries, is everybody here using RSpec or test unit, or what is it now? Not test unit.
Minitest.
Minitest. Yeah.
Well, underneath it's something else, but yeah, I know what you're saying. It's the thing that you get straight out of Rails.
Yeah, straight out of Rails.
So I'm a huge fan of RSpec, but other than old projects, I don't use it anymore. I use Minitest or the Rails built in.
Somebody else make the decision for you?
No. I say no, but what I mean is that I've been burned by RSpec when upgrading to edge versions of Rails, like betas or release candidates or even new stables. And it's a development dependency. So it's for my testing. It has zero benefit to my actual production code other than running the tests. So it should not prevent me from deploying an application to production. But if I update my Ruby gems to a new version of Rails, it could break. So what I found myself doing was using it less and less on newer projects because it is only a developer preference. Our spec is not giving me fundamentally any direct advantage over mini test or what's baked into Rails. It's just a preference, in my opinion.
That's fair. Do you do a lot of Edge Rails stuff then?
I have 3 projects that I'm maintaining that are on the latest 6.021 version of Rails.
Okay. I do not. I've never done that. I've had a couple projects now in mini test. I am now convinced that my love of RSpec is genuine because I just wanted to go. Like, I tried really hard to like give it like that honest go for like 2 years, and I learned everything I could. And I was like, in the end, I'm doing just as much work as I'm doing in RSpec to write this. Like, I'm not actually reducing my workload, I don't think. I am losing readability is what I felt like. And yeah, at the end of the day, I was like, I'm working just as hard and I'm losing readability. I don't like this. That's what I felt like.
I love how it's a measure of where your pain is, right? So John's pain is readability and, speed of development. And Dave's pain was, I've tried to deploy this and RSpec was a problem and it shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
I think that's perfectly valid.
I think that as far as a Ruby on Rails application maintainability, I would consider a application not, and I say take it with a grain of salt, please, because there's so many other factors. But in my gem file, I should not have it locked down to any version, any of the gems locked down to any version, except for very specific ones, like maybe Rails or any of the direct Rails dependencies, which they have deemed to be locked down. And I should be able to just run a bundle update, make whatever kind of configuration file changes. So if there were some new things added in a new Rails version, update those, run my tests, and then deploy. If you can do that on your Rails application, then I would say you have a potentially well-maintainable application. But if you're having to fight your gem files over and over with different versions, conflicting and that kind of stuff, then I think that you perhaps maybe have added one too many gems.
Man, I've worked on large legacy projects my entire career, and I have one rule, which is that like every single gem in your gem file should be locked down solid. Because when you have like I'm talking like hundreds of models big, right? When you have these large legacy apps, you just have big gem files because that's kind of what you've done. You're touching a lot of stuff, ERP programs and things that touch like every part of a business, right? Mm-hmm. You have all sorts of things that, I mean, let's be fair, these are monolithic applications. These are what make the name what it is, right? There's a lot of interests and there's a lot of conflicts.
So do you use the squiggle operator, or when you say lock down, or do you just tell it what version, and then if you decide to upgrade, you...
Squiggle is okay, right? Because theoretically, squiggle means that you are
compatible.
Only doing patch level, right?
Yeah.
So
I have been burned by the squiggle before, where I got a patch level and it broke stuff, but most of the time it's fine. And by most, I think it's happened like once or twice.
Yeah, over like 10 years, right?
Yeah.
I think that's fine. So what I would say in your defense, Dave, is that when I start off on newer projects, I break my rule until my gem file starts to get, like, until my project is big enough that it's a problem, right? But I've always kind of come in after a legacy project has kind of started, and I've always been there when they're going through some sort of growing pains of some kind. And eventually one of the decisions that gets made is to, let's go through all of these things that like keep giving us problem and grief, and let's just remove it, right, by locking it down.
Yep. Yeah, I use the
So-
pessimized gem almost from the go. And that way it just locks everything down to start with. And then I don't even have to fuss with it after that.
So another reason for my gem hatred, if you will, is I've been through 2 different acquisitions with the same job. So same job over the past 10 years with 3 different employers. And during each acquisition, I had to spend the time on every project that I had written for the company, go through and list out every gem that was being used,
Oh, man.
every library, get the license, and write up a document use case for each one. And if there's any agreements in place for those gems. So it's a huge pain. So that's more the business ops side of things,
Yeah.
a reason not to use gems. But, if you're a small one-man shop or a very small company, then it's probably less of a deal. But for me in the past, it has been an annoyance.
Yeah, I think the things that you do in enterprise Rails, right, versus the things that you do when you're just like launching an application at the very beginning, they are slightly different habits, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
But, that's to say, there's so much red tape in the corporations, which I think a lot of them are just not needed in certain situations. But on the other hand, having some red tape around is a good thing. Not giving developers console access to your production environment. That just relieves a huge liability off the company, and that's not a bad thing. Having a person or team of people that manages that stuff, it's good. Because that way, when I accidentally do a schema dump or truncate, and I didn't mean to, then I'm not the primary developer on the product and the DevOps person, and now I'm getting fired due to negligence.
I love that you casually are truncating here.
That has never, ever happened.
Well, we should create a tech band called Casually Truncating.
I can't think of anything necessarily more. I definitely, okay, let me actually go back to what you just said, Dave, because I do have a comment on that. I also am a big believer that your entire dev team does not need console access to your production environment. If that is sort of a requirement of how you work, I think that you kind of have process problems, right? You have something going on where if your developers need to log in every day to fix problems in the console in production, like that's scary, and that always has been to me. And I have worked somewhere where that was the case.
Well, sorry, I won't name the company because, PR junk, but there was a company whom I've never worked for, but they had a developer who needed production access so much that they just kept a openly live VPN tunnel into the production environment so they could quickly and easily access it from their local development machine. Well,
that couldn't go wrong.
Yeah. So, ransomware hit one of the support person's computers. It went all around their local network, found its way through this tunnel, and started encrypting their production servers.
Oh, no.
It took them months to get everything
I shouldn't
back.
laugh.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
But you can't help it because you saw it coming.
There's always a trade-off for easeability and ease of use versus security. And if you don't pick the happy medium, then you're going to have a bad time one day.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just mean if you're logging in every day to your production Rails console and you're changing data, not through your app's API, right? Your app's views and however you normally do it, right? You just are changing stuff in a way that's going to surprise you, right? And then you're doing work tomorrow to fix the work you did yesterday.
Yep.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a recurring task. If you always find that you have to do something, well, just write a rake task for that. And then if you have a admin UI section, you have a little dashboard that has a button which will execute that task if it's a non-volatile task.
Yep, the company
Have
that I
proper
was
log management.
specifically thinking about, I always felt like they were modifying data today, modifying it tomorrow to fix what they did today, and the day after to fix what they did tomorrow. And that was just a constant piece of work that was always going on. And that it's what it is. Don't do it.
Anything else we should talk about?
I think every developer needs loud keyboards with mechanical key switches.
Dude,
I have one of those.
I would love one. I tell you, I love mechanical keyboards. That's what I first started typing on. But because all the screencasting I do on Drift and Ruby, I don't want that super loud, like all over the place.
Yeah, I've worked with developers that had. So mine has mechanical key switches. I don't remember what they're the cherry key switches. I don't remember what color, but they're the less loud ones. Because I don't mind if it picks it up a little bit when I'm recording video. I don't like it when I'm recording audio because you just hear random, key tapping. But
So type something right now on your keys.
Yep. Okay. Can hear it.
That's not too bad.
that's not bad. But I've worked with other developers in the same office, and they had to have like the specific color cherry key switch. And man, you couldn't hear yourself think across the room.
I have one of the loud ones because the first mechanical keyboard that I bought a couple years ago, when my buddy was like, you need one. I was like, all right, I'll try it. What just was on sale, and it had the really loud ones, and I still use it, but I regret that it's so loud.
Yeah, I like the feel of it, but I wish it were quieter. And I don't like it so much that I wouldn't just go back to one that has the regular key switches in it.
I do have one that's softer, but it's not as cool of a keyboard, so I don't use it as much.
Yep.
It's on a different computer.
But yeah, I was just trying to be funny. I don't know that there's really anything else that we should be talking about.
Oh, monitors? We should probably at least discuss dual versus single.
So my setup right now, I have 4 monitors.
Slightly jealous, but I actually switched to only using one monitor. I had a buddy that we started working at a company together, and they gave us this really big monitor, and he just brought in his laptop and never used his monitor. And I was like, dude, I was using dual monitors at home at the time. I was like, dude, I really wish I had more monitors. Why are you only using your laptop? And he was like, well, because if I go to the coffee shop, he's like, then I suddenly feel unproductive because I can't do anything. So he's like, I only use my laptop and don't use anything else. And I was like, that's weird. And then 2 years later, I was doing it. And that's what I've been doing ever since. Because in my opinion, he was right. If I go to the coffee shop and I'm using 2 monitors or huge monitors at home, I suddenly feel less productive. And now I'm not. Now, because I only use my laptop monitor for working, I'm used to it.
Yeah, I don't get that at all, really, even when I'm traveling. The main thing that I do, so I have one monitor that is rotated 90 degrees. So it's, it's kind of upright. And I've got basically Discord for my team chat on there. And then I've got my calendar on it. In other words, I don't move those windows hardly at all. And then the other monitors, if there's something that I'm kind of monitoring or watching, then I'll throw it up on the other monitor on the other side. And then the 2 in front of me are the ones that I generally do most of my work on. And I do enough work where I'm working through a list on one monitor and doing the work on the other monitor. That's generally why I like having those. And if I'm at the coffee shop or whatever, or on the road in the hotel room, then I don't really feel like I'm less productive. Sometimes I do a little bit, but mostly it's just because I have to switch back and forth between windows. Whereas at home, I don't have to. But generally, I try and do other kinds of work where I only need one machine. So I'll answer emails on the road or things like that, I can just do in one window and I don't have to fiddle with the rest of it. And so I don't feel like I lose that much productivity when I'm traveling because I'm choosing tasks that are better suited to the situation I'm in.
So back in the day, I was using 5 monitors, which I have no excuse for it. So I just sent you guys an image of it. It was back before like Windows 8 was even around, so it was a while ago. But they were 1080p monitors, so I wasn't getting a lot of real estate. Now, one of my monitors basically makes up for all those five right now, and it's kind of a buyer's remorse, like a love-hate thing too. But I have two LG 5K monitors, the 5K Ultrafines, and as a display, they are freaking amazing. They are beautiful, and I don't have any eye strain anymore while working. Before, I had some old TN 4K monitors, and my eyes would get sore just trying to focus on the text. But these are truly beautiful. But the problem with them is a stupid freaking USB. So here we are, circle back all the way to the beginning of our talk, is a stupid USB. They're Thunderbolt monitors, and I have only been able to get them to run on a Thunderbolt device. So if I want to plug in a Windows computer to these monitors, I kind of cannot do it. I've even tried various different display port that are Thunderbolt capable USB-C adapters and cables, and nothing worked with them. So I hate them from that perspective, but I love them from a quality visual perspective.
Interesting.
Talk
It's
about
funny
vendor lock-in.
because I went and looked it up on Amazon, that particular model, and it says often sold with, and it has a USB-C to USB adapter, Thunderbolt 3 to USB 3 adapter. So
Yeah, so it
back to that
only
other
has-
idea. It's adding that chipset to it that it needs for Thunderbolt or whatever,
Yeah, which it's crazy.
or
So-
dumbing it down the other way.
As a Ruby developer, you've probably used Redis for queuing and caching. But if you're like me, you've never completely understood it. You just followed the tutorial to set it up and then hoped it'd stay up. Now that I'm building my own services for other people, I realize that you and I often don't have the desire or time to run an ops or DevOps team or do it yourself. Plus, since you're not a Redis expert, you're not exactly sure how to know what it's doing. That's why I love Redis Green. No setup. It runs on any AWS region I want, so I can run it near me. And the tooling is amazing. I have to tell you about this feature, actually. It actually maps the memory you're using and tells you where all the memory is allocated. So this makes it really easy to see what's going on in your Redis setup. It also runs on AWS, so it scales easily and can alert you when it hits certain thresholds in performance or capacity. Sorry for going all fanboy on you, but I love this tool. Here's the thing. If you don't want to do ops or are already on Heroku or something, then use Redis Green for the rest. It's simple, yet powerful. Check them out at redisgreen.net.
Should we do some picks?
Do it.
All right. Dave, you want to start us with picks?
Yeah, so no technology picks today, just more power tools because they're awesome. So my kids, I was working on a project over this Christmas holiday, and I have this tape measure that I love. But for some reason, I either misplaced it or more likely my kids are hiding it from me. But I kind of needed the tape measure to do the project. So I coughed up the money, went out, got another one. And DeWalt had this, free add-on included. And you can buy this thing separately, but it's a pocket laser distance measurer up to 40 feet. That thing is so cool. It doubles as a laser pointer. So if I wanted to point at something, even though I just really use it to point at the kids. But it's surprisingly accurate and really neat. So that is a DW040HD. And then my second pick is part of the project I was working on, melamine boards. So if you have a closet and if you want to just spruce it up, build some nice custom shelves, then melamine boards from Home Depot are a super easy way to do it. They sell them with the drill holes already there for shelving. And all you need to do is just slap two boards up on each side of your wall, put the boards in, and now you have some nice custom shelving.
Did
Nice.
Home Depot pay you for that? Because that sounded like a commercial almost.
No, I've just spent the past week and a half with melamine boards.
Nice. John, do you have some picks for us?
I do. So we were talking about cables earlier, and it kind of reminded me that I'm a huge fan of Monoprice. I don't know why they're still in business or whatever, but I've always bought cables from Amazon and random places, and I would never be happy with them. And then I'd be like, I need to go back to Monoprice, buy their, stuff. And I buy it, and my house is littered with their cables because those are the ones that I end up keeping, right? So I was going to throw that out there for cable. When you're just having trouble and like you're buying cables for your stuff and you're like, oh man, this cable is not charging my phone fast enough. I just bought the cheap one off of Amazon. Like, I don't know. Monoprice has just always freaking worked. And then for my Scotch pick, I got this one over the holidays. I'm a really big fan of, there's a thing called Abelor Abinad, which is basically a cask strength whiskey. And it's now super expensive. It used to cost me like $60 to get. Now it's like in the $120 range. So clearly I'm really upset when I go because my expectations are wrong. And some guy in the liquor store that gives you advice on Scotch was like, why don't you try this Glengoyne cask strength? He's like, it's a lot like it. And he was wrong, but it's really good for a completely different reason. It is a cask strength. So if you're like kind of into like rye whiskeys and stuff, which seem to be really popular right now, the cask strength is kind of in vogue or whatever. It does have that kind of taste going on, but it's a very different thing. It's a sweeter one. It doesn't have a lot of the burn that a lot of cask strength does. And you can tell it's cask strength, but this one's different. It's really good. I enjoyed it, and it was only $60 instead of the 120. I'm still probably going to have to get myself some of the Abinat. But yep, that's my Scotch pick.
All right. I've got a couple of picks. So I've been doing 100 days of Vue is the challenge that I kind of made up for Vue developers. One of the things is spending an hour just writing Vue code that you don't have to write. I've really been enjoying that. But one of the things that I've run into with it is I've been doing some screencasting, but it's streaming, and I've been using OBS for that, and I've really been digging that. It's been awesome. And then I'm trying to think because I had another pick and I was going to make sure I picked it. So one of the other picks is a TV pick on Amazon Prime. They have a series, and I think it's wrapping up now. I just barely got into it, so I'm like 10 episodes in, but I'm really enjoying it. It's The Man in the High Castle, and it takes place in the 60s, and it's essentially takes place after the Nazis in Japan won World War II. Anyway, so there are these films that are going around that Japan and Germany are trying to keep quiet. They tend to bring and inspire people to fight back. And you get these people that get involved in the resistance and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, just great stuff. So like I said, I'm about 10 episodes in, and I'm really enjoying it. I kind of enjoy the historical aspect, and it feels like they've thought through a lot of what was likely to happen, to lead up to, this time period, and then to place people in it. So I'm going to pick that. And I guess that's all we've got. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. And in the meantime, Max out.
All right. Talk to y'all later.
Awesome.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.